Back in December, all eyes in energy circles and beyond were glued on the UN's global climate treaty talks in Copenhagen. Well, despite high hopes among thousands of diplomats and activists that gathered in the Danish capital, the talks went nowhere until the final 24 hours when leaders of major nations, including President Obama, hammered out the Copenhagen Accord. All major emitters have now signed on to that deal, but it is voluntary, and the carbon-cutting pledges are well below what advocates say is needed to stop climate change. The next chance for a tougher and binding world agreement is in November in Cancun, Mexico. Here to talk about the prospects for world climate talks and the negotiating process is somebody who knows these talks and the UN process very, very intimately. Connie Hedegaard is the Commissioner of the EU for Climate Action. Connie, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Now, you came to Washington, D.C. to talk with Climate Envoy Todd Stern and White House Climate Advisor Carol Browner and others. You were here to talk about implementing the Copenhagen Accord and to try to move forward on world climate talks. How did the talks go this past week?
I think they went very well, but of course it is quite a challenge. How can we secure momentum in these talks? In Copenhagen, we saw for the first time ever emerging economies like China, like India, like Brazil, now saying, yes, we know we have a co-responsibility for handling this challenge. But then the next step, what will that have to be? All the world leaders said, we will stay below the 2 degrees. Fine, how are we going to do that? And that is what Mexico should be all about. How can we, by Mexico, deliver specific action, specific results? And that was what our talks here in Washington.
Did you get some answers?
No, but I think basically that your administration will agree with what the European Commission is saying, that we must now try to have a stepwise approach, because we could keep expectations very high, say we will get everything done by Mexico. But how many will really believe that is realistic when we see what is coming out of different capitals? So the more stepwise approach is a way to secure ambition, not to lower ambition.
So you say the word from the major emitters, major developed countries, is less likely to have solid results out of Cancun?
No, but we also see the problems internally in the United States. I mean, how well is it going with your climate and energy bill at the Hill? So we see many places having difficulties doing this, and then we could spend a lot of energy discussing what kind of format, legal form, should a future agreement have. Or we could do it the other way around, say, let's just first agree on content. How are we going to do with our forests? What about adaptation? How about technology? How to incorporate the Copenhagen Accord into the formal negotiations. And then when we agree on that, hopefully in Mexico, and that is a full plate for Mexico talks, then we could discuss what kind of form should that then have.
You're right. So very important, because now the framework it has been called into question. The Copenhagen Accord was sort of made outside the UN framework process. No other agreement came out of COP15. So now some are sort of calling it fatally flawed. Do you think the framework needs to be abandoned, and people are talking now about more progress being made in bilateral talks and the G20s and smaller negotiations?
I would wish it was so easy, but I just think that then you would just see some new obstacles. And I think that also from what we hear, for instance, from China, for instance, from India, they do not want the Copenhagen Accord now to be a new third track. There are already 2 tracks in the negotiations.
Is there any reason to go back to those 2 tracks?
No, yes, there is, because many countries in the world will not discuss anything but those 2 tracks. So that's one of the, it's not just United States or Europe or whoever defining how the talks can continue. It's the whole world. That, of course, is the challenge. But I think there is a way forward, because I think we could incorporate those things that we actually gained in Copenhagen. And contrary maybe a bit to the general impression, actually in Copenhagen we delivered specific progress on forestry, on adaptation, and on technology. And these progresses could be cashed in by Mexico. And then one final thing, which is crucial. In Copenhagen, developed countries pledged substantial financial support to the least developed countries in the world, how they can adapt to climate change. And I think it's crucial for Mexico to sort of turn these pledges into specific deliverables. It's so crucial that the developing countries can see there is money now on the table.
And it was just last week the EU called for that cash to start flowing.
We are ready.
To get it together. So what is the progress there? Are the countries coming up with the funds?
Well, the European finance ministers this Tuesday said, we are ready, we can do it. We could do it already this spring. I also got the understanding for conversations with your government that they know that yes, you have to live up to the pledges being given, and so is also the atmosphere in Japan. So I think that could be a very important signal from the developed countries to the developing countries that we are serious about these pledges.
So you want to integrate the Copenhagen Accord into the UN framework negotiations. Where does this leave the Kyoto Protocol? Because this was a major sticking point in Copenhagen, with the developed countries saying that it's not going to do the carbon cutting job, and the developing countries saying they will not move forward without it. What's the future for the Kyoto Protocol?
It is still uncertain, I would say. Europe has done whatever we have pledged under the Kyoto Protocol. We have also seen that we could actually create job and innovation and enhanced energy security by living up to the targets that we sort of took under the Kyoto Protocol. We know that's not how you see it in the United States. So there are many problems with the Kyoto Protocol. The problem is there are even more problems probably to try to invent something else. But basically what we saw in Copenhagen was that in the Kyoto Protocol, only 30% of global emissions are sort of asked to do something under the Kyoto Protocol. Under the Copenhagen Accord, 80% of global emissions were represented in saying, okay, we share a co-responsibility. So that is definitely something to build on in whatever international regime will come after 2012.
So what else is being done differently in the run-up to Cancun that is going to leave us feeling like this won't be another Copenhagen?
I hope that we can manage expectations and also secure that countries feel obliged to actually deliver on pledges being given in Copenhagen. So in that sense, it should be very much focused on specific actions, specific deliverables. And
there are a couple of lead-up meetings before then, and calls for more. Do you expect a lot more to be scheduled before November?
I think that if you have to secure ambitious outcomes of Mexico, you will have to use all kind of international fora, formal forums, informal forums, also to discuss these kind of things. Basically, I think that the achievements we got in Copenhagen, that was very much due to what went on in a lot of informal dialogues, where politicians could really sit around the table and do political talks. Because, you know, when you have thousands of negotiators, you saw it yourself in Copenhagen.
Exactly.
That's not the most efficient way of working.
Right, but you can't just throw out that whole process.
Exactly.
What is your role in these new talks? Are you doing what you did last year and reaching out to individual countries during the run-up?
Yes, basically now on behalf of the European Union, try to understand the positions, try to explain the European position, and try to do whatever I can to secure that we get progress.
Okay. Now, 2 months after Copenhagen, we had the Executive Secretary, Evo de Boer, stepping down. Any ideas for us on who might be the replacement there?
Not that I would share with you publicly, but I think it's very important that it's a person who sort of knows the dossier, and I think Evo de Boer has been very good at trying to communicating the importance of this issue to the world.
You're encouraged about a new leader?
That was very important. Sorry?
You're encouraged by the prospects for a new leader?
I'm sure that the UN Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon, he knows that this is a very important portfolio, and the man or the woman who will have to take that job will have to catch up very, very quickly, because this matters to the whole world.
All right. Well, we wish you luck in your travels and your work in the run-up to Cancun.
Thank you very much. And get that legislation done here in the United States,
Yeah, we'll do our best. Connie Hedegaard, a EU Commissioner for Climate Action, thank you so much.